On the afternoon of August 15th, 1941, a petite 24-year-old Belgian woman walked unannounced into the British consulate in Bilbao, Spain. With her were 3 bedraggled Allied soldiers. She had just guided them across 800 kilometers of Nazi-occupied territory and over the Pyrenees Mountains. The British diplomats simply could not believe her. How could this slight, attractive young woman, looking barely 20, have accomplished such a feat? They suspected a German trap. Yet André de Jong, codenamed Dede, would prove them spectacularly wrong. Over the next 17 months, she would personally escort 118 Allied airmen to freedom across 24 round trips over the Pyrenees. The escape network she founded, the Comet Line, would save 776 Allied personnel, making it the most successful escape network of World War II. This is the forgotten story of the woman the Germans called a little girl, whose youth and gender both hindered and ultimately saved her life. When World War II engulfed Europe, André Eugénie Adrienne de Jong was 23 years old. Born on November 30th, 1916, in Schaerbeek, Belgium, she had grown up in a town then under German occupation during the First World War. Her father, Frédéric de Jong, was a primary school headmaster who instilled in his younger daughter a powerful sense of justice. He called her Little Cyclone because of her determination to make things happen. The most formative influence came from a story he told her about Edith Cavell, the British Red Cross nurse executed by the Germans in 1915 at the Tir National in Schaerbeek for helping approximately 200 Allied troops escape occupied Belgium. This tale of a woman martyred in her very hometown would haunt and inspire André throughout her youth. She trained as a nurse, explicitly inspired by Cavell, and worked as a commercial artist in Malmedy. When German forces invaded Belgium on May 10, 1940, the 23-year-old immediately moved to Brussels, became a Red Cross volunteer, and began ministering to captured Allied troops. She helped British soldiers send letters home, organized safe houses for men left behind after Dunkirk, and procured civilian clothes and false identity papers. But hiding men indefinitely seemed futile. They needed to return to Britain to fight again. In spring 1941, André organized friends Armil Depay, Henri de Bliquet, and Baron Jacques Donnet to create an escape route. They worked for the Société Financière de Transport and Entreprise Industrielle, and initially called themselves the DDDs after their surnames. The group suffered an immediate blow when Henri de Bliquet was arrested in April 1941 after infiltration by Prosper de Zita, a Belgian collaborator. It was an ominous portent of things to come. In June 1941, Arnold Depay traveled to southwestern France, where he had once lived, to establish southern connections. He contacted the de Grief family in Anglet, near the Spanish border. Elvire de Grief, known as Tante Go or Auntie Go, would become indispensable. Her husband Fernand worked as an interpreter for German authorities, a position that provided blank documents, seals, Ausweis passes, and extra ration coupons. Their son Freddie became the network's primary forger, and their teenage daughter Janine, at just 16, became the youngest courier. The first crossing attempt in July 1941 ended in disaster. De Jong and Depay led 10 Belgians and a secret agent across the Pyrenees, but left them to navigate Spain alone. 3 Belgian soldiers were arrested and turned over to the Germans. This taught André a crucial lesson. They must accompany escapees all the way to the British consulate in Bilbao. In August 1941, the operation split into 2 groups. Depay took a shorter, more dangerous route with 6 men. De Jong took a longer, safer route with 3 men, including British soldier James Cromer from Aberdeen and 2 Belgian volunteers. Depay's group was betrayed and arrested. De Jong's group successfully reached the De Grief house, crossed into Spain with a Basque smuggler, and arrived at the British consulate in Bilbao. One group 10 arrested for the basket. It was the moment that would change everything. When André de Jong appeared at the British consulate that hot August afternoon, the vice-consul could scarcely believe that so petite and attractive a young girl could have made the journey on foot across the mountains by a smuggler's trail after traveling across occupied France. The diplomats feared she was a German agent. 3 weeks of doubt, suspicion, and indecision followed as telegrams flowed between Spain and London. Claude Dancy of MI6 was particularly suspicious, fearing a Gestapo plot. She had confidently promised, "I will be back in a few weeks with more men," when she reappeared in October 1941 with RAF aircrew, meeting MI9 representative Michael Cresswell, codenamed Monday. The arrival of valuable aircrew dispelled doubts. MI9 agreed to fund the line, approximately 6,000 Belgian francs and 1,400 Spanish pesetas, but André insisted on complete operational independence. She rejected British and Belgian government-in-exile attempts at control, refused offers of radio equipment until June 19, 1943, fearing German radio detection, and declined advice she felt came from people who were not aware of the situation. Lieutenant James Langley of MI9 later admitted the Comet Line's intransigence and failure to make use of some of the help we offered them nearly drove me frantic. Yet once proven, British officials became devoted supporters. Donald Darling gave her the codename Postman. Airey Neve, the former Colditz escapee now coordinating MI9 operations, described her as one of our greatest agents and a pure heroine of legend. The standard Comet Line route became Brussels to Paris by train, crossing the Somme at Corbie, Paris to Tours, to Bordeaux to Bayonne or Saint-Jean-de-Luz by overnight express, Bayonne to Urugue by bicycle or on foot, then the Pyrenees crossing, approximately 7 kilometers to the Spanish border, an 8-hour night march covering 25 to 26 kilometers, through mountains 500 to 600 meters high. In Spain, the route ran from Oyarzun to San Sebastian, to Bilbao, to Madrid, to Gibraltar, and finally by air to Britain. The network earned its name Comet from the speed of operations. In one remarkable instance, an RAF bomber crew was rescued in just 1 week. André had a ritual introduction for the airmen she escorted. She would say, "My name is André, but I would like you to call me by my code name, which is Dede, which means little mother. From here on I will be your little mother, and you will be my little children. It will be my job to get my children to Spain and freedom." One airman responded, "Our lives are going to depend on a schoolgirl." But British airmen quickly learned she was anything but a schoolgirl. They described her as having eyes absolutely burning with an air of supreme confidence. Her physical appearance, frail and appearing barely 20, was her greatest asset and weapon. Germans simply could not conceive that such a young woman could lead an underground network. The operational network she built involved an estimated 3,000 civilian volunteers, of whom 65 to 70% were women. Safe houses dotted the entire route. In Brussels, the Swedish canteen, directed by Baron Jean Grindel, codenamed Nemo, served as headquarters. Multiple apartments belonging to Betty Warnen, Elizabeth Leblanc, the Marshall family, and the Neve family sheltered airmen. In Paris, the Dejeune family apartment became a staging point. In Anglet, the Villa Voisère, less than 1 kilometer from the German commander's house, served as the southern base. At Urignay, Frontier Usandizer's farmhouse was the final stop before the mountain crossing. The network's security methods were sophisticated. Airmen traveled with escorts but maintained distance on trains, were instructed never to speak, and hid behind newspapers. Young female couriers attracted less German suspicion. Code names were universal. Airmen were parcels. Communications were letters. Tight compartmentalization meant helpers were warned to expect no longer than 6 months before being arrested. Every crossing brought danger. The Pyrenees themselves killed. The 8-hour night march through mountains in all weather, over rugged terrain, crossing the swift-flowing Bidasoa River, claimed lives even without German intervention. Florentino Goicoechea, the primary Basque smuggler, made over 70 crossings, carrying injured airmen on his back, guiding groups through snowstorms, and once carrying an airman who had broken his ankle for 18 miles through the mountains. But the greatest danger came from human betrayal. The Germans offered substantial rewards for information: 1,000 Reichsmarks for captured Allied airmen, 10,000 Reichsmarks for resistance organizers. The network suffered repeated infiltrations. The most devastating came from Jacques Desubris, known as Jean Mason, who infiltrated the network in late 1943 and was responsible for approximately 15 arrests. Working closely with Gestapo operative Pierre Boulez, Desubris reported directly to German intelligence. His betrayals led to the execution of several key operatives. Another traitor was Pierre Boulez himself, who had previously infiltrated the Burgundy Line and then targeted Comet. His methodical work helped the Gestapo systematically dismantle parts of the network. The Germans called their operation to destroy the escape lines Aktion Heckenschütze, sniper operation. The campaign was ruthless and effective. On the night of January 15, 1943, André Duyarme was guiding 3 British RAF airmen across the Pyrenees. They were at Ugny preparing for the crossing when Gestapo agents surrounded the safe house. Someone, possibly infiltrator Jacques Desubris or another informant, had betrayed them. She was arrested along with the 3 airmen, Sergeant Norman Davies, Flight Lieutenant Bob Grimes, and WGCDR James Barrett. Franco, Jean-Francois Nothomb, her deputy, was not present and escaped to continue operations. The Germans interrogated her extensively. They simply could not believe that she, barely looking 20, was the mastermind and organizer. During interrogations at Avenue Louise in Brussels and later at Fresnes prison outside Paris, German intelligence officers repeatedly suggested she must be working for someone else. A man must be the real leader. André never wavered. She insisted, repeatedly and emphatically, that she alone had founded and directed the Comet Line. She protected others by taking full responsibility. This incredulity saved her life. Under Nazi policy, leaders of resistance networks faced execution, but the Germans classified her as merely a guide, not the organizer. She was sentenced to imprisonment rather than death. From January 1943 to liberation in April 1945, André endured 28 months in concentration camps. Ravensbrück concentration camp from August 1943 to August 1944, where conditions were indescribable. Then Mauthausen concentration camp in Austria until liberation. At Ravensbrück, she was prisoner number 19,672. She endured forced labor, starvation rations, brutal conditions, and constant threat of execution. Yet she maintained her dignity and courage. Fellow prisoners remembered her organizing clandestine support networks within the camp and keeping spirits alive when all seemed lost. On April 22, 1945, the U.S. Army liberated Mauthausen. André weighed less than 80 pounds and was suffering from tuberculosis, but she had survived. Her father, Frédéric Duyarme, was not so fortunate. Arrested in June 1943 with Baron Greindl and others, he was executed at Montfalerian on March 28, 1944. He was 63 years old. Before his execution, he wrote his final letter. He expressed pride in his daughter's work and his own small part in saving Allied lives. He called her his little cyclone. The casualties among Comet Line helpers were staggering. Best estimates suggest 290 of the 3,000 volunteers were executed or died in concentration camps. Florentino Goicoechea's wife Carmen and daughter Pilar were arrested in retaliation for his activities but survived. Antoine Dussel, Jacques Cartier, who reconstituted the Brussels Centre in 1943, drowned crossing the flooded Bidasoa River on December 24, 1943, along with American pilot Jim Birch. Arnold Deppe, co-founder, was arrested in August 1941 and imprisoned for the remainder of the war. But many survived. Elvier de Grief, Tente Go, avoided arrest throughout the war, continuing operations until September 28, 1944, when she flew 4 airmen from liberated Biarritz to England. She received the George Medal. Micheline Dumont survived and exposed and filtrated des Abris in May 1944. She received the George Medal and died on November 16, 2017. Jean-François Nothomb, Franco, who replaced André as primary escort, was arrested on January 18, 1944, but survived concentration camps. He received the Distinguished Service Order. Florentino Goicoechea was shot 4 times on July 26, 1944, but was dramatically rescued from a Bayonne hospital when resistance members disguised as Gestapo agents arrested him and spirited him away. He survived, receiving the George Medal and Legion of Honor. The 3 British RAF airmen arrested with André on January 15, 1943, all survived the war in prisoner of war camps. The statistics tell an extraordinary story. In 1776 to 800 successful evacuations, sources vary slightly, the Comet Line saved primarily British and American airmen, with some Belgian volunteers and other Allied personnel. André de Jong personally escorted 118 people to freedom in 24 round trips across the Pyrenees from August 1941 to January 15, 1943, a period of just 17 months. She averaged more than 1 successful round trip per month through some of the most heavily guarded territory in Nazi-occupied Europe. The southern section alone spent 17 million French francs, equivalent to $5 million in 2017. The British provided consistent funding once the line was proven, recognizing that training a bomber pilot cost £10,000 and a fighter pilot £15,000. Making rescue economically vital beyond the moral imperative. After spring 1944, with Allied invasion imminent, the network stopped transport operations and created holding camps in remote areas. Brittany, the Belgian Ardennes, and Fréteval Forest near Château d'Eaume. Elvier de Grief made a final Comet Line operation on September 28, 1944, flying 4 airmen from liberated Biarritz to England. On February 13, 1946, André de Jong walked into Buckingham Palace to receive the George Medal, the highest British award to a civilian. She also received the Medal of Freedom with Golden Palms from the United States, Chevalier of the Légion d'honneur from France, Chevalier of the Order of Leopold and the Belgian Croix de Guerre with Palm, and honorary rank of Lieutenant Colonel in the Belgian Army. In 1985, King Baudouin made her a countess in recognition of both her wartime service and her subsequent humanitarian work. For André chose an extraordinary path after liberation. She completed her nursing studies and dedicated herself to working in leprosy hospitals in Africa, fulfilling the dream she'd held since age 15. She served in the Belgian Congo, Cameroon, Ethiopia, and Senegal for over 2 decades. In 1959, at the Coquilhateville leper colony in Congo, she met English novelist Graham Greene, who recorded her war experiences in his journal. When he asked why she came to Congo, she replied simply, "Because from the age of 15 I wanted to cure lepers. If I had delayed any longer, it would have been too late." In Addis Ababa, at the Gate Clinic, working with colleague Thérèse de Wael, they cared for over 4,000 leprosy patients. Few who met her during these years in Africa knew of her wartime exploits. When her mother was dying, the RAF made an unscheduled stop in Addis Ababa to fly her to Belgium, then returned her to Ethiopia. A final gesture of gratitude from a service whose airmen she had saved. Eventually, in failing health from her concentration camp experiences, she returned to Brussels, where she maintained connections with Comet Line associations and reunions with survivors from England, America, Canada, and Australia. On October 13, 2007, André de Jong died at age 90 at the Clinique Universitaire Saint-Luc in Brussels. Her funeral was held on October 19 at La Combre Abbey, and she was interred in the crypt of her parents at Schaerbeek Cemetery at Ever. The same Schaerbeek where she was born during the First World War and where Edith Cavell had been executed. Her legacy endures in multiple forms. A street, Rue André de Jong, bears her name in Brussels' new Tivoli Quarter. The Dans les Pas de Minique walking trail, a 10.3-kilometer French-Belgian hiking circuit inaugurated on May 9, 2015, follows the route used by the Comet Line. The Passage of the Frontier statue stands in Backy, France, honoring Comet Line guides, evaders, and resistance fighters. The Comet Freedom Trail, an annual commemorative walk each September, retraces the Pyrenees crossing from Saint-Jean-de-Luz to San Sebastian. Approximately 26 miles of the route she traveled 24 times. Museums across Europe feature her story. The International Bomber Command Centre in the UK, Eden Camp World War II Museum in Yorkshire, and the Royal Military Museum in Brussels. Annual wreath-laying ceremonies continue at the Kokelberd Basilica Memorial, where a plaque commemorates the help given to Allied airmen. André de Jong's story encapsulates a profound historical irony. The same characteristic that made British and German officials skeptical, her youth and gender, proved to be her greatest operational advantage and ultimately her salvation. The British couldn't believe she had accomplished such feats and initially suspected a trap. The Germans couldn't believe she masterminded the network and spared her from execution. Both were prisoners of their own prejudices about what a young woman could accomplish. Yet she and her network achieved what seemed impossible, maintaining the longest operating, most successful escape line in occupied Europe, helping 776 Allied personnel return to fight again, and providing crucial psychological reassurance to bomber crews facing nightly missions over Nazi territory. The cost was staggering. 290 helpers executed or dead in concentration camps, including her own father. But the achievement was unprecedented. British airmen who met her spoke of her burning eyes and supreme confidence. Mi-9 officer Arie Neve, himself a legendary escapee from Colditz, called her one of our greatest agents and a pure heroine of legend. The rescued airmen never forgot. As one put it, the value went beyond the individuals she was saving. She gave hope to thousands of air crews that if shot down over occupied Europe, there was an angel of mercy with a complete system ready to find them and bring them home. When she died in 2007, she had lived long enough to see her story inspire books, films, walking trails, statues, and museums. She had received the highest honors from 4 nations. But perhaps her truest monument is simpler. The hundreds of Allied airmen who came home, lived full lives, raised families, and never stopped telling the story of the young Belgian woman who saved them. And the thousands of their descendants who owe their existence to a petite little mother whom the Germans simply couldn't believe was capable of what she accomplished. That was André de Jong's greatest triumph, not just in what she achieved, but in how thoroughly she transcended the limitations others tried to impose on her.